Creating these classes requires equipment and services that cost money. If you appreciate this education, please think about going to elithecomputerguy.com and offering a one-time or monthly recurring donation. Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli, the Computer Guy. In today's class, we're going to be doing an introduction to wireframing. That's right, boys and girls. Grab your pen, grab your paper, and show the class what an artist you are. So what we're talking about when we're talking about wireframing is we're simply talking about drawing out how your application should function so that you can use this as a schematic when you sit down to actually code and develop whatever project that you're trying to develop. Think about wireframing as a schematic that, let's say, a carpenter or a woodworker would use in order to build a bookshelf, right? So if a carpenter is going to sit down, they're going to build a bookshelf. They will draw out, a design for how that bookshelf is supposed to look, and then as they're building that bookshelf, they will then reference that design that they've created. The same is true basically with wireframing. What you do is you sit there and you have an idea. You have an idea for an application. Maybe it's a mobile app. What I wireframed here is an IoT. So I actually have an Arduino that communicates with a PHP script, goes to MySQL, whole 9 yards. So it might be IoT, it might be mobile, it might be a web app, it might be something very, very, very sophisticated. But basically, when you're wireframing, what you're doing is you're simply drawing out and trying to figure out everything that your application or that your software will need, trying to figure out what the information flows, what it needs to connect to, and all that kind of thing, so that when you sit down to actually code and design everything out, you have something to reference. The other thing that's very valuable when you do wireframing is that, frankly, it's a hell of a lot easier to do editing and proofreading and such when you simply are using a pen and paper in order to do it, right? When you sit down and you actually code out a piece of software, especially when you're dealing with user interfaces, there are a lot of things that interact with each other. So if you simply want to center something or change a font for something or change a color or something like that, you can have a lot of problems once you've actually coded the application, because when you start moving things around, it's going to affect other things, right? So wouldn't it be better is during the design phase, during the wireframe phase, that's when you figure out, okay, this is more or less what everything should look like. And then if somebody else says, no, this shouldn't be that way, it should be over here, or this should be here, right? It's a lot easier when you're simply dealing with pen and paper to be able to argue and change things. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about how to do wireframing. And this is one of those things, a lot of new people, they want to skip over this particular process. But honestly, this right here, this is probably one of the most important things you're going to be doing when you're going to be developing your application. So now that you have a basic idea of what wireframing is, let's go over to the table and I'll actually try to explain to you what's going on with this particular wireframe that I sketched out. So here's a little wireframe that I sketched out. Now, to be clear, when I'm going to be doing a lot of the coding projects in the future, I am very interested in IoT. So I'm interested in Arduino, I'm interested in Raspberry Pi, I'm interested in having these things communicate up with cloud functions and that type of thing. So do realize when I'm teaching you folks how to code, this is from a very classic IT-centric ideology. Basically is I want my devices to be able to communicate back with servers and then have those servers be able to present me with information that I care about. So if you're trying to create video games, if you're trying to do other kinds of coding projects, just to be clear, I'm probably not going to be teaching you things that are the most relevant for what you're going to be doing. I'm interested in the IT administration world, the IoT world, that type of thing. So basically what I have here is a basic project design for having an Arduino with a temperature and a humidity sensor. So my idea is I'm going to create a little Arduino device. This will actually most likely be an Arduino Uno with Wi-Fi. So the Arduino Uno with Wi-Fi has a full Wi-Fi stack on it. So it is able to collect sensor information, and then with that Wi-Fi stack, it's able to post that sensor information to something such as a PHP script. So what I'm showing here is I have my Arduino Uno. On my Arduino Uno, I'm going to have a temperature sensor connected, and I'm going to have a humidity sensor connected. And so again, this is a way, before I start trying to plug things into the Arduino, I can just simply draw this out, say what sensors I want to be connected to it. Other people can have arguments about it, and we can try to hash that out before we get to the place where I'm actually having to mess around with connecting everything to the Arduino itself. So here I just sketch out the Arduino. So I'm going to have the Arduino. It's going to have a temperature sensor. It's going to have a humidity sensor. Then we have a little arrow here to show that it's going to be sending data. So it's going to be sending data. I'm going to be sending it to a PHP script. So that PHP script is then going to receive the temperature data, and it's going to receive the humidity data. Then, because I'm going to be doing things such as charts, and so for charts, I need things like timestamps, I'm then going, with PHP, I'm going to add the timestamp here. And so this is an important thing to be thinking about, and this is one of the values of wireframing, right? So with an Arduino, you can actually add what is called a real-time clock to the Arduino. So the Arduino could send the temperature of the humidity and the time to the PHP script. But that means I'd have to add the actual physical real-time clock to the Arduino. It's an extra module that gets added on, and then I have other things that I have to worry about. So this is where it's useful for wireframing, where we can have an argument about, does the Arduino send the time values, or is the PHP script going to add the time value, right? We can just argue that out here on a piece of paper. So what I'm going to have is, I don't want to have to deal with an extra module. I don't want to have to deal with coding for it. I don't have to want to deal with failures or dead on arrival or any of that kind of crap. So I'm not going to put the real-time clock on the Arduino itself. I'm simply going to add a timestamp from the PHP script. So I have the PHP script. It's going to receive the temperature from the Arduino. It's going to receive the humidity from the Arduino, and then it's going to add a timestamp. It's then going to send its data. We're going to have a MySQL database. There's going to be called a reading table. That reading table is then going to get the temperature, the humidity, and then the timestamp that has been added from the PHP script. So basically, this is how the information will go. The values will go from the Arduino to the MySQL database table. From there, I then am going to want an administrator dashboard. So this will be an HTML dashboard, HTML, CSS, possibly JavaScript, something like that. And so I'm showing here is this data, we got the arrow, will then be able to be used for the administrative dashboard. I'm simply going to have something that says current, and then we're going to do temperature, humidity, do a little box here. For temperature, it'll say 97. For humidity, it'll say 50. Under that, I want a little chart that'll say what the temperature and humidity has been like for the past 24 hours. That's why the timestamp is required. And then down here, for the last week, gonna have another chart. So basically, it'll show us what the current is, it'll show us what the trends for the past 24 hours are, and it'll show us what the trends are for the last week. And so with this gives me a basic design. I can start writing out something called pseudocode, we'll talk about in a later class, and start trying to build out this particular project. But look at this right here, right? Isn't it better to be editing, to be modifying, to be changing, to have arguments over a piece of paper and something that I scribbled out, versus imagine if I tried to actually design, code all of this out, and then once it's completed, we then started having stupid arguments about how all of this stuff can work. The other valuable thing, again, with wireframing is, again, especially if you're new to coding, when you start doing things like last 24-hour charts and last week charts, it gets you to start thinking, what do I need what values do I need in order to do things like create time charts, right? So if I have a temperature and a humidity sensor, if that's all I passed from the PHP script to MySQL, I didn't do a timestamp, then when I would go to do a chart, again, how would you do that chart? If you don't have any times, if you have no timestamps, you can't do a chart. So by drawing this type of thing out, you can go, oh, yeah, I want a chart here. So what's required in order to do a chart? What's required in order to do a chart is a timestamp. Oh, okay. Well, I'm probably not going to get the timestamp from MySQL. It's not going to be inserted by MySQL. So then I can either insert the timestamp in the PHP script itself, or possibly from the Arduino. And then again, there you can have your own arguments about why you would do that type of thing. And so this is just a very basic wireframe, again, kind of from the IoT world using an Arduino device, passing the information to a PHP script, passing that to the MySQL database table, and then having an administrator dashboard. So with this type of thing, though, it can be much more complicated. You could have 10 dashboard pages. You could have 20. You could have 500, right? The idea here is that you're drawing all of this out pointing what the flow should be, and then trying to figure this type of thing before you actually sit down to code. So now that you have an idea of what wireframing is, you may be sitting there going, but Eli, come on, real technology professionals aren't going to use a pen and paper. There's going to be some sophisticated, application out there for doing wireframing. And the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of sophisticated tools out there that allow you to do wireframing. But if you have a rather simple project, let me tell you, a good old pen and paper really does the trick. Again, when you're going to be developing relatively simple projects, again, we're talking about websites with maybe 5 or 6 pages, again, little IoT projects like this, that type of thing. Honestly, there really does have to be a question of, do you want to have to dig into, a piece of additional software to actually be able to design everything. If you just have a pen and paper, you just grab the pen, you grab the paper, you sit there, you scribble up things out, you cross some things out, you put some new stuff in, and it can actually be a hell of a lot simpler and a hell of a lot quicker just to do it the old-fashioned way. But if you are interested in using more sophisticated software, there are a lot of products out there that allow you to do wireframing relatively easily. One of the things that I will tell you is something that you might want to take a look at is basic graphic software in order to do wireframing. So this is something I used to do back in the old days. Photoshop, basically use Photoshop, and especially when we were designing things like web pages, basically just create the home, the about, all of those pages, and we would actually wireframe simply in Photoshop. One of the nice things with doing the wireframing, the mock-up in Photoshop is you could change things like fonts, you could change things like colors, you could move pictures around relatively easily, and essentially it's basically a drag and drop thing. So if I have a customer and we do the about page, and I'm like, okay, the about page is going to be here, and then your bio or whatever is going to be here, and your picture is going to be here. One of the nice things they can do is they can say, well, I don't really want the bio to be on the right and the picture to be on the left. Can we put the picture on the right and the bio on the left? And the nice part is, again, if you're using like something like Photoshop, you just drag the picture to one side, you drag the bio to the other side. You're like, okay, does that look right? And then they're like, oh, yeah. So again, using something like Photoshop can be very useful. If you want your wireframe, your mock-up to be more interactive, you can also do things such as use something like Google Docs, or again, I also used back in the old days, Word, right? So with Word, you can actually create hyperlinks and you can export as a web page. So again, this is not something that is going to go in the production environment. You're not going to upload this to a web server or anything like that. But if you're dealing with a rather simple application, being able to draw everything out, mock everything up, and then have hyperlinks so people can click through. So like if you're going to like a report section, obviously if you're using Word or Google Docs, that's not actually going to be connecting to a database backend, but you could simply just mock up a little table. So like if you have an administrative dashboard and you click on a button that says reports, you could click on that button and that button would just go to some report page that would simply have a table on it. That table would be static information. It wouldn't be being pulled from anywhere, but it can just show you, okay, this is what basically the table will look like. This is where the menu bar will be. These are some of the colors and things that we're thinking about, that type of deal. So really something to think about if you're going to be doing wireframing and you want to get past the basic pen and paper. Again, think about using the equivalent of Photoshop if you have it. Think about using the equivalent of Google Docs, possibly Keynote, PowerPoint, that type of thing, Word, all of those types of things. That can be very useful for easy wireframing and mock-up. Back in the old days, that's one of the reasons why people really liked things like Dreamweaver or the Visual Studio out of Microsoft. So Visual Basic used to be huge. So Visual Basic was a software creation package from Microsoft, and the cool part is you could just, it was GUI interface for doing things like creating forms, creating all the interfaces for your application. So one of the nice parts with Visual Basic is you can actually design all the forms, you could design all the reports, you could design everything, and then make sure that your user liked whatever it was you created, and then once they gave you the okay, then you would create all the code to actually connect everything together appropriately. So that was one of the reasons people liked Visual Studio back in the day. If you're looking for other wireframe software, again, if you're thinking about using wireframe software, you may be on a team where you need to be able to share the wireframes, maybe possibly multiple people are adding to the wireframe. Again, especially if it's a large project. If you're looking for other options out there, there are a lot of other options. So let's go over to the computer for just a second so I can kind of show you just how many wireframe software options there are for you. So here we are on my computer. I did just want to show you this this particular example from a Medium post, but this is where this one person, basically, as you can see, they used a computer and mocked up the little iPhones themselves, and then once that was mocked up, they went in and hand sketched out how everything should look. So this is what a wireframe can look like too. But if you're thinking about wireframe tools, basically what you do is you just go to Google, you type in wireframe tools, and then you can see an absolute crap ton of wireframe tools out there. So this is kind of going to be one of those things where depending on what you are looking for, what your price point is, what the company that you're dealing with wants, you may be able to find free solutions out there, or you might be able to find solutions that are relatively expensive. You know, they've got Adobe products, the whole 9 yards. If you can go over, I just pulled up this particular wireframe tool called Mockflow. And so it kind of shows you with this, it allows you to basically easily be able to create these wireframes, design things out. And again, you're just sketching all of this stuff out so you have an idea of how it should look. If you go down, you can see it allows you to create sitemaps, allows you to collaborate with a team. It has a lot of options out there that may be valuable for you. So again, you know, when you're looking at any kind of programming tools, just like any other kind of application that you'll be purchasing, you need to think about what your requirements are, how much money you're willing to spend. So for this, you know, they've got a free basic version that is $14 a month. The team pack is $30 a month. So whether or not you would use a pen and paper or whether you would use Mockflow, it really just simply depends on what your particular situation is. So that was just a basic introduction to wireframing. Again, if you have not played around with doing wireframing before, you want to start coding applications, again, whether they're IoT applications, whether they're going to be websites, anything like that, you really need to get used to doing wireframing. Basically, just being able to sit down, take a pen and paper, or take a basic piece of software, sketch out what an application should look like, and more or less how it will work and what the information flows will be is very valuable for yourself. Just like if you were a carpenter building your own bookshelf, it can be very useful just to make sure you're on the right track, right? You don't start doing something that you didn't mean to do. But also, again, when you start working in a team environment, when you start dealing with customers, when you start dealing with clients, making sure everybody is on the same page is incredibly important. It's one of the worst things when you're dealing with real customers, real clients, real bosses, is you can sit down, you can have a big old business meeting, you can take 2 hours. At the end of it, you can say, okay, does everybody agree with what we talked about today? They'll all nod their heads. You then go, you spend the next week or two coding out the project, you come back, and then you start to have people go, this isn't what I agreed to. And if all you did was talk, then there's nothing to point back and say, well, no, this is what I got signed off on. So one of the things too, again, when you're thinking about doing coding, a lot of new people, right? They always want to focus on learning programming languages, learning infrastructure, learning cloud functions. They want to know, they want to think about all the cool things. But one of the things you have to think about when you're dealing with customers and bosses is making sure that you have documentation that what you did is what they said that you should do. So by doing things like wireframes, basically you do this wireframe, you walk your boss or your client through how everything should work. They go, oh yeah, I agree with that. And then you say, okay, can you just sign here just to verify that you agree with what we've talked about today? They sign. And then when you come back in a week or two with all that code that you've created, and they say, oh, well, that's not what I wanted. And they're like, well, curious that. See this? See this? Right here is your signature saying this is what you agreed to. Again, we think about the time thing. And this is an important thing to think about in the coding world. This is one of those perfect examples. So in this particular project, again, we need that timestamp. So I'm going to be using the PHP script in order to create the timestamp that will go into the MySQL database. But that timestamp could come from a real-time clock on the Arduino. So if I sketch all this out, my view when I look at it as a professional, I think it's best to have the PHP script to do the timestamp, right? So if I draw all this out, I sit there with the customer or the boss, we all agree with this. When I come back, a week or two from now, and then they start screaming, no, don't you understand? Don't you understand for, regulatory reasons? Again, there may be different reasons for why the PHP script or the Arduino should do the clock, the timestamp function. They may come back and say, well, that's freaking ridiculous. Don't you know what the regulations are? Blah, blah, blah. Of course, the Arduino has to provide the timestamp. Or we can't use this, right? By having that little signature, you can say, look, when we discussed this 2 weeks ago, right here is where the PHP script adds the timestamp. I built the code based off of what you signed. So we can, again, you're the boss. You're paying me. You're paying me. So you can continue to pay me to modify the code that I've already created so that the Arduino is now using a real-time clock. If you agree to that, sign here on the new wireframe, and I will build to that. But to be clear, I built to the specifications that we agreed upon. So any changes, fine, I will do that work, but that's your changes. Right? That's the kind of thing that you use, again, to cover your ass. So not only is the wireframe, the mock-ups, not only are these valuable for you, again, when you're just making sure everything is doing what you're supposed to be doing, but it's also useful for the boss, for the customer, because that's what happened. I've done these coding projects in the past, and it sucks. It sucks. You do exactly what you agree. You do everybody agree. Oh, you spend hours. You spend hours to make sure everybody's on the same page. You get them all on the same page. And then 2 weeks later, you're all proud. You're like, look at what I created. And I'm like, ooh, I didn't agree to that. Like, no, in fact, you did. In fact, you did agree to that. So some of those things to be thinking about. So that's a brief overview of wireframing. If you want to know more about it, again, you can go out and do a basic Google search. There's not a lot. This is not an overly sophisticated subject. So you can go out there, you can get a basic idea of what's going on. And then again, like I say, you can go out there if you want to use software for whatever reasons. Again, if you're using software, it makes it easier to email or send links to whatever you've created. It's easier for collaboration. It is easier for some reason, for some uses. So if you're interested in using software for wireframe, there is a crap ton of it out there. There's probably 100 different wireframing apps that you can use. What you're going to use really depends, again, how much money are you willing to spend, what are the features, what are the functions, all of that kind of stuff of the wireframing tools, and then basically figure out what it is that you want to use. Past that, they're all relatively simple to use. Again, it might take you a day or two to get up to speed, but none of them should be too difficult. Though what I will say is if you're looking for a way to create wireframes electronically, but you don't want to pay that extra money, in all seriousness, look at like any kind of imaging software that you already have, something like Photoshop. Again, I used that back in the day. It's a very useful way to do wireframes relatively easily. If you want something that's a little bit more functional, again, Google Docs or something like Microsoft Word, exporting as a web page and then having links within the web pages that you've created to each other, that gives an interactive kind of wireframe that you can create to get a better idea of, okay, when I click this, that page opens up, and then when I click this, that page opens up, and when I click that, oh no, we are right. That is also a way that you can create wireframes, and it might be good because again, it's creating an electronic version. You can share it, all that kind of thing, but it won't cost you any extra money, and you should probably already know how to use those products. So as always, I enjoyed teaching this class and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Apparently, the type of content you just saw is not what Susan W. wants for the future of YouTube. This means that recommendations by YouTube to this channel have dropped massively and views are becoming comically small. I hate to ask. I used to say I would never ask, but if you could subscribe, like, comment, and most importantly, share the videos that you appreciate, that may help slow the death of this channel. Do remember that if anything at all happens to this channel, you can go to EliTheComputerGuy.com to view the content and access information not available on YouTube.